for G7 and G20 summits. In a short span, he has engaged with global leaders and thinkers. He has led delegations across the globe. He has held various cabinet portfolios, including Union Minister for Commerce and Industry, Civil Aviation, Ministry of Railways, and other portfolios as well. He is truly known for his out-of-box thinking. He is a pragmatic and practical political leader with great exposure to global affairs. Sir, may I just capture that in earlier discussions we highlighted the need to come up with some new ideas in terms of promoting further the India-Africa partnership, given the tensions and stresses caused by COVID-19, and also specifically in the context of G20, because that is where, as you just heard, Ambassador Suklal also pointed out about Germany's compact with Africa and this rising expectation that India would be, also having something similar or even bigger, because India is seen as the natural friend and partner of Africa. So with these words, may I request, sir, you to address the audience.
So thank you very much, my dear friend, Ambassador Bhatia, for giving me this opportunity to meet such distinguished people, particularly from, of course, my friend from India and my friends from South Africa, who also happens to be my colleagues, as well as from East Africa, who we consider as so close to India, geographically as well as listening. All of you, I really wish to thank you, thank CII for organizing this very interesting program. As we always seen, that in all the 6 continents of the world, all the 7.4 billion people that live in those continents, each one try to connect with the other. And particularly now more so because of technologically it is possible that we can connect digitally. There has always been a quest to connect with each other. But for India, there is a special bond that has with Africa. We want to connect with everybody, but we feel that we want to connect with Africa because of certain emotional, spiritual, and maybe something much more than that we feel for the Africans. Of course, Africans are our ancestors, as they are ancestors for all the human beings of the world. The first human being was born there. But more importantly, with Africa, we have a very unique umbilical cord that cannot be disconnected. Therefore, when it comes to relations with Africa, they have never been more than what emotions drive it. Therefore, we like to do as much as possible for Africa, with Africans, for their benefit, and obviously some benefit can accrue to India as well. But first consideration is that Africans must benefit first. We don't want to go to Africa as big brothers, as someone wants to extract something from Africa, whether it is mineral or otherwise. We want to be partners with Africa so that Africa and Africans must benefit first. And that's a guiding principle. In fact, I articulated it many times as Commerce Industry Minister when I used to have India-Africa Summit, India-Africa Ministers meetings. And I always said that the guiding principle for relationship with Africa would be that Africa and Africans must benefit first. And Africans more because the people matter more. In fact, very interestingly, if you look at the profile of Africa, it is same as India, 1.3 billion people. But if you take the median age, Africa would be half of the median age of the world. Not exactly, but almost, like say 60%. Median age of Africa is very low as compared to the rest of the world. So Africa is the oldest continent in terms of where the human being was born millions of years ago, but the youngest in terms of population of the Africa. And therefore, when you are a young population, you have a lot of aspiration. But when you are such a civilizational continent, then you have deep roots. So we must understand Africa from that context. that we must do something in Africa which will be very futuristic and aspirational for the Africans, but should never forget the strong roots the Africans have in their culture, their traditions, their history. So that has to be done and kept in mind. For India, obviously nobody can be as old as Africa. But in terms of civilization, India is one of the oldest living civilizations. We have a bond with Africa going beyond just trade and commerce. It's something much more than that. Therefore, we value this relationship a lot, and we must do something in future which will be based on these fundamental principles. Now, Africa's economy may be slightly lower than that of India. Now we will almost be touching 3 trillion, 2.9 plus. And Africa is not just one country. It is 54 different countries, different sovereign territories, different nationalities, but uniquely shared vision, shared culture, shared ideas. So can we therefore link with Africa and India, work closer with each other, so that your shared vision can become an extended shared vision for India? Let's give an example. You're already working on $5 trillion economy to begin with. We prepared a roadmap for $5 trillion under leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who also values this relationship a lot. He has a special love for Africa. Now, can we therefore work with you, with the African Union, with the African Development Bank, with countries in Africa, with your national governments, that we can have a shared vision like this? Can we not have another $5 trillion, $10 trillion vision for Africa, in which we can work with you to realize that vision through our private sector participation, G2G contacts, by civil society coming together and working with you, by people-to-people relationship, which can foster this relationship to a new level. And that in itself will ensure that per capita incomes of Africa will rise rapidly. Some of the least developed countries in Africa will actually get extra benefit from such kind of a shared vision. And that can also happen through multiple platforms. But one of them could be, can we have a free trade agreement with Africa? Can we not make an FTA with Africa? We always, Africa and African nations try to do FTA with other countries. We also have quite a few FTAs with other countries. But India and Africa must have an FTA, which I tried as a Commerce Industry Minister. And that could be done in such a way that Africa should not be the loser, but will be the winner. And in that FTA, we can always factor in the concerns of Africa and address them appropriately to ensure that Africa will never lose out on that. Because we are a bigger economy, and Africa as a whole is bigger economy, but there are smaller countries who may face some challenges. And therefore, how can we work together? In fact, one of the challenges of Africans going to be in the future is the restrictions that some countries are trying to put on free trade. I'm worried about it, because some countries in Africa, they export only one item. And if the free trade is affected, what happens to those economies? How will they survive? If one country is exporting only cotton, and now you are trying to work in such a way that some of the importing countries in Europe or US or some developed countries, they try to put such restrictions on import of cotton from Africa, what happens? So we are promoting with all my African friends, how do you have a free trade will benefit Africa? In fact, I had two important mini ministers in India. I chaired both. One was attended by 57 countries. In fact, my African friend, Minister Davis, participated in both of them as my dear friend and my special colleague. And we worked together to make this happen. So I would like to make sure that trade would be the best way for Africa to progress. We always said trade and not aid, but aid has gone and trade is now getting finished. What happens to Africa? We want to make sure that we like to be your partner, to make sure that global trade is never done in manner that works against the interest of the Africans. We like to work on that. We like to make sure it happens. While we work together as partners, we can always explore the possibilities of working together. I'm very happy that I will divide into two parts, taking cue from my friends from East Africa as well as a South African colleague and friend. Agriculture is going to be the major driver of economic growth, besides providing livelihood in Africa, as it is case of India. More than, though our GDP for agriculture is only 14%, more than half of the population is dependent on agriculture. And agriculture in Africa is a mainstay for most of the economies for livelihood. How do you increase productivity of agriculture? Incidentally, Africa is the last continent of the world where arable area is not fully used for agriculture. All of the countries are virtually reaching a tipping point. Africa will be the last resort for ensuring food security of the world. But while you feed others, how do you feed the Africans? How do you make sure agriculture provides employment opportunities to Africans? How do you get skill-based training to Africans? How do you provide them opportunities? So India and Africa can join hands. We have agriculture research. One of the largest agriculture research organized in the world are in India, which is called Indian Council for Agriculture Research. How do you relate with you? How do you take research from laboratories to the farms of Africa to improve productivity? We can work on that. Secondly, we are working on an interesting program for providing food security to our friends in the Middle East. That was something which I prepared agriculture export policy. Can we work with Africans to be partners in this? We are already working with other countries. Like Japan and India are working in Africa. First time it's a new opportunity. Prime Minister Modi's idea. Where joint projects are getting implemented in Africa, with Japan and India becoming partners. And we use the same model in a reverse manner. Can Africa and India join hands for providing food security to others in the world? Other important issue is of the health of the people. India has always emerged as a top pharmaceutical destination of the world. I was a commerce industry, I was a minister for environment, yes, I was minister for 10 different portfolios. One of them was chemicals and fertilizers. I was responsible for pharmaceuticals. And in that, I had proposed, can we work with Africa to make a hub for formulations, a new drug delivery system? Because Africa is also vulnerable like India. Large population, any pandemic comes, we are the victims. Though not the cause, but the victims. So how can we work on that? How can we work together? And we can offer our assistance to you in that area of pharmaceuticals. Because India has now become, I will not call it, but some people call it pharmacy of the world. Therefore, how can we use that strength to benefit our friends in Africa? Climate change is a major challenge to both of us. Industrial evolution created climate change because it is human-induced. Neither you nor us can claim to be responsible for it. But we are the victims of it, sufferers of it. How can we work together to make this happen is something which you can do. I personally feel we can definitely make infrastructure in Africa as a priority. In fact, there are so many ambitious projects. There's a project called Cape to Cairo, wherein you wanted to connect to grid, connectivity for electrical, physical connectivity, digital connectivity. We'll be very happy to be your partners in developing the infrastructure of Africa. We'll be very happy to work with you through Exim Bank. In fact, when I was the commerce minister, we recapitalized the Exim Bank. We gave them more capital. In fact, for your information, my friends from Africa, we have created country by country specific studies for finding out which are the niche areas in which Africa can benefit, India can benefit. I always believe that unless Africa also benefits, we don't want to do business with Africa only for our benefit. It should be mutual benefit. We are not like any other country which wants to go to Africa and grab everything. We want to come to Africa as partners, as friends, and work with you. And to do that, We have prepared country-wise specific strategies, and we can definitely work with you on that. We personally feel there are many opportunities that we can tap together. In fact, I can clearly see that opportunities are galore. We can train people for self-employment. We can make Africa as the new continent for future growth. And as I said, we have already a vision of $5 trillion. We can have a shared vision with Africa. How do we jointly benefit from the growth? Because both of us are still not optimally developed. We're still developing countries, aspirational societies with traditional values. All these things being common, there are opportunities. Private sector in India is a very dynamic sector, which has the entrepreneurial spirit, which has a drive, which has ambition, and therefore, while we can work to government, I would also encourage a lot of private sector participation into these bilateral relationships. We strongly feel that private companies can add a lot of value to Africa's growth. In fact, in East Africa, because of the proximity, that time there was only one way that we could travel to sea, and then we were so close to each other, literally. And therefore, there are so many Indians, people of Indian origin, who live there, but they are now African. And I always tell my friends in Africa who are Indian origin that you are Africans first, because you live in that country, you are naturalized that country, you are citizens of those countries. So you must have at heart, obviously, the place that you came from, but you must do first for your Africa. So we have the strength. We are people of origin, diaspora are living there. We like to use all of that, but I can definitely guarantee you that Prime Minister Modi, he strongly feels that India and Africa must work together for their common good, for the good of the rest of the world. And as you talked about G20, we'll be hosting it in 2022, and will be obviously South Africa is a very distinguished member of the G20 grouping and always a very respected member. So we like to work with you, but we'll also like to work with other African countries. I will tell you something which I always mention in all my G20. In fact, today I had a bilateral with the Minister of Saudi Arabia on this very issue, which I was saying. In G20, there are 20 countries. But we do not speak only for those 20, but we feel like India and Africa together. We speak for those who are not in the room, because there are more 200 other countries in the world whose interests also we must try to protect. So there is a proposal now that G20 must work for the entire humanity, for all people. When we take the presidency, we will have to use that presidency in 2022, but we'll become part of Troika end of the year, because we'll be hosting in 22 along with Italy, Saudi, and India will be working at Troika for the next year. And then we'll like to work towards using this platform for betterment of Africa. As it is, there is a proposal to write off debts of poorer countries in the world at the G20 presidency. So G20 will be an important platform India would like to use for helping our friends in Africa. We'd like to work with you. Looking forward to doing that. I stop here only because Ambassador Bhatia is going to conduct the questions. He's one of the most distinguished diplomats, very knowledgeable person, has served in Africa, as he has served in so many countries. But he has served not Africa, not India, he has served humanity. So I really look forward to him offering some advice, sage advice, to how do we take this relationship forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shri Suresh Prabhu, for those kind words. The so many observations you have made on the subject, which are ringing in my ears, and I think your own sensitivity to Africa and the consciousness of the high stakes involved in India-Africa collaboration, that comes out clearly from very specific ideas you have mentioned. As we had anticipated right in the beginning, just before you came, you have highlighted the need and the thought of the possibility of a FTA with Africa. So this is one question we could pursue. You have straight away listed out the very obvious sectors on which you have worked all these years: food security, healthcare, climate change, agricultural cooperation, Cape to Cairo infrastructure development, and also the significance of complete association of the private sector as well. And of course, as India's very distinguished G20 Sherpa, you have pointed out as to the possibilities, the immense possibilities for collaboration with Africa from that channel as well. Now, at this stage, let me pick up a few questions, because we have a flood of questions, and we really need to see how best we can have a focused discussion on them. I think let me start with a question from here. I'm fortunate I have a name also from well-known expert on Africa from India, Ruchita Berry. She has a specific question to Ambassador Suklal. The question is, what is your perspective in the top most development priority for African countries? And while you are at it, may I also add one other question, Ambassador Suklal, which is for you to kindly express your thoughts about this possibility of a free trade agreement with Africa at the continental level. Is that feasible? Is that possible? And how should we go about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhatia. Let me start with the second question first. I think, given that now we have a continental free trade area, it makes the idea of looking at a free trade agreement or a PTA with India far more feasible. And I think the opportune moment is now, as India gets ready to chair, to host the next India-Africa summit. I think this discussion should already start with the AU Commission, and I think it should start now before you assume responsibility to host the next summit. You could put this on the agenda of the India-Africa summit. I think the template is there now, given that we have a free trade area within the continent. It would be much easier to deal with. On the area of Africa's developmental priorities, what is topmost? I think Agenda 2063 and its first 10-year plan of action is very clear on what Africa needs are. And therefore, when I spoke about the India-Africa Summit and the 10-point plan that Prime Minister Modi alluded to, there is a great deal of complementarity in terms of Agenda 2063. Now, some of the key areas that will catapult Africa into the forefront of the global economy is to create an enabling environment. Africa has for too long been a provider of raw materials to the global community. How do we make this rich resource that Africa has work for the African continent in partnership with its global partners? So beneficiation of our raw materials, industrialization. Africa has lagged behind, but the fourth industrial revolution provides a tremendous opportunity. And therefore, I spoke earlier on that India can play a key role here, given your strength in the ICT sector. Another very important area, we can have the best infrastructure, the best ICT, but we must resource our people, educate our people, and provide them with the necessary skills that speak to the development of the African continent. So I think skills development, capacity building is a key priority, as much as, of course, we have given major focus now to infrastructure and connectivity in its broader sense. So I think these are some of the key areas. And of course, the health sector that we spoke of, having a healthy population is critical to move a country forward. We can have all of the other ingredients in place, but if we don't take care of our most important resource, educate our people, provide them with the necessary skills, and provide them with decent jobs and employment and with health facilities that take care of the basic needs as well. So these are some of the key challenges that must be dealt with parallelly going forward.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Very helpful. At this stage, let me once again, facilitate more African voices at this stage. And I would like to come to Madame Mugienzi. And this question is being asked on the basis of the comments made by two Indian business leaders earlier, Madame, which you had noted. There was one idea that given the complexities of the COVID era, when there is unemployment, there is a need for safe distancing and the rest of it all in transportation and in manufacturing. So the ideas came up were that maybe there should be the consideration of a kind of a barter arrangement whereby manufactured goods such as vehicles could be offered as part of an arrangement for minerals. There was also the suggestion by Mr. Seth whether rupee trading could also be considered. So the question to you is whether these ideas need to be studied and considered, or whether the African side could suggest some similar ideas from the business perspective so that there is a new kind of thinking on this theme. Over to you, Madam.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador. It has been a very insightful discussion, and thank you for pointing out those issues that were brought up by the speakers before. Definitely, you mentioned those priority sectors, and I just want to say that priority development and investment sectors that India has pointed out are at the same time and a priority sector. A priority sectors also in the African countries. You get all those that have been mentioned, like transport, that was mentioned before, the transport infrastructure, water development, ICT, adding value to agricultural materials, the natural resources, and definitely the previous speakers talked about skilling the human resource that's in Africa. All these sectors are very, very vital, even during these unprecedented times. And I'm glad that Honorable Prabhu has talked about, and very passionately, the issue of mutual benefit between India and the 54 African countries. As we look at these areas where we can partner, the issue of mutual benefit is going to be very, very important. But we need to also look at the low-hanging fruit that we have right now. We keep mentioning the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It's a low-hanging fruit because if you think about the proposed PTA that could be on the agenda to discuss between India and Africa, you can imagine the huge combined market for the products and services that will be produced. So we do need to follow up on this PTA agreement between the two of us and try to take opportunity to grab that low-hanging fruit, because when we look to the increased intra-trade within Africa that's going to be occasioned by this agreement, you look at the proximity, low cost of business, so many opportunities come with it. Increased returns on business. This is something that needs to be pursued and definitely will benefit both the peoples of Africa and India. But I just want to encourage many of our participants out there that the environment will be very important. We need to look at the regulatory environment that's going to foster what we are trying to discuss right now. And definitely we can't run away from the fact that there are some internal barriers, but most of the governments, actually all the governments in Africa, are looking to reform their regulatory environment to make doing business easier, because already Ashok and the companies that are in Africa definitely will tell you that the opportunity is there. There are high returns on business, but there are also some barriers that need to be handled at country level and at regional level. Yeah. So even as we look to engaging more in this partnership, I'm optimistic that the regulatory reform that is taking place is going to make the environment enabling. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. May I now turn to Shri Suresh Prabhu. Sir, we have actually two questions for you. One which emanates from what Ambassador Suklal said earlier. He referred to the fact there is Make in India program, and now the new version Atmanirbhar concept is very much there. And on the other hand, there is Make in Africa program. So he suggested that why don't we work for Make in Africa-India program or India-Africa program. So this is one question. What do you think about this idea? And the second question relates to the next India-Africa Forum Summit. Now, we know that physical summit may not be possible for perhaps another year. Therefore, do you feel that at a time when our friendship has to be strengthened further, would it be desirable to hold a virtual summit, a video conference between India and Africa, so that at the leadership level, ideas could be exchanged and new plans could be developed to carry forward our common vision? Over to you, sir.
So firstly, this Make in India and Make in Africa, both are important programs. In fact, I feel there is a huge opportunity there for both. Because globally, whatever we are manufacturing in one particular country, it is part of a global supply chain and a global value chain. So if you can actually make some part of what we are going to manufacture in India, I will benefit, but we'll develop a new supply chain, which can eventually leverage the capabilities of both Africans and Indians to the benefit of the whole final product that will be produced. In fact, we'll be happy, and we should be doing that very soon, discuss the opportunities of such complementarity which exists between India and Africa to manufacture for the world. What are we manufacturing for? We manufacture Make in India for India, but not just for India. Make in Africa is Make in Africa, not just for Africa. We are manufacturing it for the whole world. And therefore, the world is driven by global supply chains and global value chains. So how do we become part of that together? It's an opportunity. In fact, I don't see any contradiction. I see, in fact, complementarity. I see a possibility of collaboration more than before. In fact, I proposed it when I was speaking as a chief guest for the India-Africa Summit, when we called all the top African ministers. Some of them were presidents, some of them were presidents. And I spoke, they are speaking about it and gave this argument. Another thing, I'm just to add to this, because there is a proposal that we should have a virtual summit. I don't want to tell you, but it is a good idea. We consider that idea. But I want to tell you something, particularly my friend from South Africa, as well as my friends from East Africa. We have a very interesting forum called Members of Parliament Council, and that is in CII itself, which has more than 150 members of parliament from all parties, all spheres of life, all geographies. And CII is also a business-oriented organization. So we can have one summit with South Africa and members of parliament and your business leaders, with CII and the MPs from participating in it. We can do same with East Africa. And we can do that very soon, because in East Africa, again, your organization represents all the businesses. We can actually make this happen so that this can become a very good starting point for a virtual action, virtual conversation on going forward to bring about the potential we realize between India and Africa, so we can do that. Another idea, because virtual, see, there are so many Africans, including some of the heads of state and heads of government, that can study it in India. Can we therefore not offer that platform for virtual education? This is something which is going to happen as a reality. We can develop virtual education platforms together for offering world-class education to friends in Africa by staying there and spending some time physically in India. You can do that. You can work on many such ideas. But I would immediately put up Ambassador Bhatia will be agreeing with this, that members of parliament and business can actually have these conferences very soon. I will request Rajesh, as a representative of CII who is present here. I have discussed with Satyajit Banerjee, take it forward very quickly so we can actually start doing that immediately, which can help in a great deal to take it forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prabhu, for those very positive comments. I think we are running out of time, but just to be very fair to the two business leaders, I think I have one question to both of you, Mr. Bhagat and Mr. Seth. And if you'll be just good enough to address them in brief. The question is that in your respective sectors, on one side, the transportation sector, on the other side, the MSME sector, are you having conversations, of the kind Mr. Prabhu has just mentioned with your counterparts across Africa? And if not, then would you like CII to consider helping you and assisting you in this? Because on the one hand, you have issues with the government, which you have highlighted, and they only can be pursued in a different format. But first, I think your ideas must be, shared with your counterparts in Africa. So, do you feel there is some scope for our very prestigious national apex chamber, CII, to take forward at this score? So, first, Mr. Seth, would you like to respond?
Yep, thank you. I think we are having conversations with the many government representatives, and there have been very encouraging discussions. Yes, the speed of decision making has been slowed down because of the working on a virtual way. But I'll say there has been no communication gap with the many governments, at least across the 15 to 16 countries where we are directly dealing with them. Thank you very much for the help, but I'll say there has been absolutely a good relationship and it's working quite fine. It can be done faster. I'm sure with the COVID, when things open up, things will be much faster. But I'll say no challenge at all just now in terms of a communication. It's actually quite well going.
Yes, Mr. Bhagat.
Thank you.